Pour montrer à quel point cette histoire de bon cholestérol et de mauvais cholestérol est ridicule ou absurde, on pourrait aussi dire qu'ici ce serait l'hôpital, ici ce serait le lieu d'un accident, et dans ce cas-là, l'ambulance qui va vers l'accident, on va le dire qu'elle est mauvaise, alors que l'ambulance qui revient vers l'hôpital, on va dire qu'elle est bonne.
Promise presents Tom and Jerry in butter trouble. Promise Buttery Light has 85% less saturated fat and no cholesterol. So it's a better choice than butter to help reduce the risk of heart disease. Are you still eating butter?
Cette histoire de cholestérol, immédiatement, est entrée en relation avec des intérêts industriels notamment. D'une part, et surtout au début de l'industrie agroalimentaire, qui s'est mis à sélectionner et à promouvoir des aliments qui allaient dans le sens des recommandations d'Anselkis, qui justement disait il faut manger moins gras, il faut faire... Donc il y a eu une véritable convergence d'intérêts entre l'industrie agroalimentaire et ce qu'on appelait à ce moment-là déjà les prohibitionnistes du cholestérol, ceux qui voulaient absolument considérer le cholestérol comme l'ennemi public numéro 1.
This little book, Your Heart Has 9 Lives, is by Jeremiah Stamler, MD, and it was sent out to thousands of doctors all over the country. And here it is. It says, this special edition is published by Pocket Books in association with the Corn Products Company as an advertisement for corn oil. And here it is in the back, an advertisement for Mazola margarine and Mazola corn oil as part of this book. The rest of the book is dedicated to talking about, science and heart attacks.
Heart disease is the nation's number one killer.
You make me feel so young.
An estimated 60 million Americans have high serum cholesterol.
You make me feel there are songs to be sung.
Too much saturated fat
may be bad for your height.
And every time I see you grin,
bad for your height.
I am such a happy individual.
For your heart.
In 1948, Procter & Gamble, which is a company, the maker of Crisco oil, a vegetable oil, they designated the American Heart Association as the beneficiary of a radio contest called the Walking Men Contest. And overnight, this is in the American Heart Association official history, overnight they received millions of dollars. And there's literally quotes about how that launched them into the national association that they are today. I mean, that they then spread offices all over, open chapters all over the country. And that was, money poured in. I mean, those are literally the words in its own official story. And then subsequently, the American Heart Association started to say that you should replace saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats, which are vegetable oils, which was, a tremendous endorsement to a product like Crisco oil.
Nekoliko hipoteza bori se protiv nadmoćne teorije o kolesterolu. Kilmer Mekali otkrio je slučaje vrlo male djece koja umiru od infarkta, boluju od rijetkog genskog poremećaja zbog kojega ne mogu zadržati vitamine B, pa u organizmu ostaje prevelika količina tvari koja se zove homocistein. Mekali iznosi pretpostavku da se naslage u arterijama stvaraju kad ima previše homocisteina.
I began to do experiments with animals. And what we did was first we injected homocysteine into rabbits, and then we looked at the arteries, and we found that within 2 or 3 weeks we could see plaques in the arteries. Well, I can't tell you how exciting it was to see the plaques in the arteries. I mean, to have a theory and to try it out in animals and then to see it with your own eyes it's indescribable. When I published my first article in 1969 about this observation in children with homocystinuria, I was amazed that I received over 400 reprint requests, and I was very careful what I said. And what I said was I felt that the changes produced by homocysteine were the primary changes, and the deposition of cholesterol and fats in the lesions was likely to be secondary. And so this did not go well with the cholesterol people. And I wasn't really prepared for what happened next. First thing that happened, I was put down in the basement, down with the spiders and the cockroaches, in the basement of the Bullfinch building, which was built in 1811. So here I was in a windowless, inadequate laboratory, and my colleagues saw the handwriting on the wall and were leaving, and I was left with one technician and myself. And they said, well, you have to renew your grant or we can't support your salary. You have to leave. And I still remember getting a call from the director of public relations at Massachusetts General Hospital. He told me to just shut up and that he didn't want the name McCulley associated with the name Harvard or Massachusetts General Hospital at any time in the future. And I told my wife at the time that if there was something wrong with the theory, if this was nonsense, if there was nothing to this theory, nobody would care. The only reason that people cared was there was a threat to somebody or there was some important factors that I didn't understand that was causing this blackballing that happened to me.
Our segment 3 this evening, the second in a series on heart attacks and what causes them.
The Japanese have a low heart attack rate. Their diet contains little animal fat or cholesterol. Americans get many more heart attacks, and they eat much more cholesterol. Such comparisons first convinced many doctors that Americans should change their eating habits. Dr. George Mann, a veteran heart researcher, says diet has nothing to do with heart disease. Dr. Mann points to his own studies with the Maasai tribe of Tanzania. Dr. Mann thinks part of the reason is that the Maasai get a lot of exercise.
The reason that there is no evidence on the exercise issue is because we've spent our money and our time and our people belaboring this ailing diet heart hypothesis.
George Mann would go, you could go to Kenya and study the warrior class of the Maasai that lived primarily on milk and blood and meat from the cattle they herded, and this was an extraordinarily high saturated fat diet, and they didn't seem to get heart disease. They had high cholesterol. They didn't seem to get heart disease.
He was bitter about his experiences. I mean, one of his stories, which doesn't surprise me because I've heard this same story from in some form or another, from other researchers, was that he was in NIH, and the NIH, where he had been a researcher, prestigious position, and a secretary called him out into the hall and said, Dr. Mann, if you continue your opposition to Ansel Keys, it's going to cost you your research grant. And shortly after, it did.
Mes chers auditeurs, en ce moment, le peloton monte vers le col ayant ce maillot jaune, je ne le vois pas, il se perd dans le brouillard, ce n'est pas possible. Ah, le voilà. Mais que se passe-t-il? Il a l'air de payer aujourd'hui ses efforts d'hier. Oh, il n'en peut plus. Voilà qu'il s'arrête. Va-t-il abandonner? Un spectateur vient l'encourager, mais quoi, il veut le nourrir, inutile, il n'a pas faim. Ah, du sucre. Bonne idée, ça.
Znanstvenici su primijetili da uvođenje šećera u prehranu starosjedilačkog stanovništva uzrokuje bolesti srca i krvožilnog sustava kojih dotad nije bilo. Christine Kens otkrila je povjerljive interne dokumente šećerne industrije koji dokazuju da je ta industrija subvencionirala istraživanja još od 1960. godina kako bi skrenula pozornost sa šećera i kolesterol proglasila jedinim krivcem za bolesti srca i krvnih žila.
John Yudkin was a British physiologist who became very concerned about the connections between sugar consumption and heart disease. And he really became a spokesperson that gained attention in the media, that gained the public's attention about the potential dangers of sugar and heart disease. So in 1964, the sugar industry became really concerned about the evidence that was emerging linking sugar to heart disease. So John Hickson, who was the Sugar Research Foundation's vice president of research, commented that there were flowing reports from laboratories such as Yudkin's linking sugar to heart disease, and that they needed to come up with a plan of action. In 1965, a series of articles that was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine was written up in the New York Herald Tribune, which was a major competitor of the New York Times at the time. It got a full-page article in the Sunday edition. And the newspaper article was questioning whether it really was fat that was linked to heart disease or was it sugar that was linked to heart disease. And the article went on to say this link between sugar and heart disease had been theoretical up until this point, but this new evidence was really strengthening that link between sugar and heart disease. So as soon as that article came out, within a couple of days, the sugar executives committed funding for Project 226. That was a commissioned literature review, and the industry was interested in having researchers at Harvard to collect the evidence linking sugar to heart disease and to publish a review that would critique all of that evidence to make it less likely that policymakers would consider that evidence when they were looking at the links between sugar and disease. So here they're corresponding about the drafts of the paper, and Hickson at the sugar industry wrote to Hexted saying he'd expected to see a draft by now and was wondering why it had been delayed, and is saying, I hope you will find it possible to let me have a copy of the draft of the manuscript at an early date so that he can complete his obligations. This is a letter from Hickson at the Sugar Research Foundation to Hexted saying, thank you very much for the draft of the manuscript. Let me assure you this is quite what we had in mind, and we look forward to its appearance in print. It really focused on, does sugar cause heart disease? And they reviewed an enormous number of studies and picked apart every study one by one and pointed out some sort of flaw. The published article did not mention any funding from the Sugar Research Foundation. So here we have Harvard researchers, we have the highly prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. The sugar industry could not have found a more credible avenue to get their message out.
Kako bi napokon dokazao ulogu kolesterola u kardiovaskularnim bolestima, s obzirom na to da je većina znanstvenika i dalje skeptična, Američki zdravstveni institut 1977. pokreće kliničko ispitivanje koje uključuje 3800 muškaraca s vrlo visokim kolesterolom. Odabranoj skupini propisuju prehranu siromašnu kolesterolom i daju joj lijek kolestiramin koji snižava razinu kolesterola u krvi.
So it's very interesting because you have this very narrowly focused point of fact, which is middle-aged men able to keep a rigorous discipline of consuming a particularly noxious drug find a very slim reduction in cardiovascular disease. And what's actually published out of the study is a much, much broader conclusion that reducing cholesterol will do good things for the American population, and that not only for this group of people, but for anybody really over the age of 2.
Oh, I'm worried.
Why, honey? Those hunters haven't been around here in months.
No, I'm worried about your cholesterol level. I don't want you to have a heart attack.
But, honey, I'm a doc.
Heredity is only part of it. You've also got to watch what you eat, like not stuffing yourself with foods high in saturated fats and cholesterol.
Watch what you eat as if your life depended on it. It does.
The National Cholesterol Education Program. On the one hand, there should be more screening of cholesterol happening in clinics to find pathologically high cholesterol. On the other hand, there should be a broader sensibility that the everyday American would know something about cholesterol.
Les habitants des rives de la Méditerranée sont moins sujets aux infarctus que les autres, et tout cela provient de leur régime alimentaire, composé notamment d'huile d'olive et d'autres fibres. C'est ce qu'a découvert une équipe de médecins et chercheurs lyonnais.
C'est l'étude du docteur de Lorgeril en 1999. Il a une approche très originale. Il s'est dit, et si c'était plus compliqué que ça? Et plutôt que de faire des régimes qui font baisser le cholestérol, il a pris le problème complètement à l'envers. Il s'est dit, qu'est-ce que mangent les gens qui ne font pas d'infarctus? Et il a identifié le régime méditerranéen, c'est-à-dire le pourtour de la Méditerranée,